So in COVID-19 pandemic, South Korea is relatively doing okay. In February, we confirmed that, of course, we had a big case, surging case in Daegu in February. However, Korea has managed pandemic quite well. So I'd like to talk about why we were able to respond well, and many mentioned about the 3T model. 3T model starts from the local level. Normally, the world don't trace the community level. However, if there is a surging case of tests, then we trace the cases, and the third case is treatment. There are facilities that accommodate patients with mild cases, so that they are separately administered to mild cases hospitals. So if you can remember 3T, that you can keep that in mind. In suicide prevention, there are many things. However, these are happening already in the COVID-19. If there are confirmed cases, the community or the local government goes quickly and then finds the suspicious patient. So we provide early test, and then we trace the person. And sometimes foreigners are quite surprised to learn that if you have to do self-quarantine, then sometimes the government officials go and check if you're doing okay, and if you're not okay, the government officer goes their home and take care. So this is also a good opportunity to find people in under stress. So we are working very hard to control COVID-19, but why we're still struggling in terms of controlling suicide? It's devastating to learn that we have recorded 13 consecutive years in terms of suicide rate. As you know, our rate was not that high, but since IMF, the crisis, and after 2007 and 2008 economic financial crisis, every time there was financial crisis that we have witnessed surge of suicide rate. Starting from 1998 and to 2020, we have seen the dramatic changes in population. In the 19th century, then if your parents has dementia, then over 90% of the people said, of course, the children have to take care of them. But in 2020, the rate has dropped to 30%, less than 30%. And they said the government, the society has to take care of my parents. For example, my father has 7 siblings. And if one of them is job loss, then the 6 other siblings help the brother or sister. So we were family-centric. However, we have the personal capital more than 10,000, and we are now enjoying 20,000, 30,000 US dollars. But suddenly, because of, in contrast to the well-off, that the population in Korea, the size of the family has decreased. So 1 or 2 children have to take care of their parents. So the family size has changed drastically. So we have come to realization, if there is no social support network, whether it's COVID-19 or due to job loss, then it can also cause mental stress. So this shows that if there is no social support network, that the problems can trigger in series. As you can see from the slide, Korea shows the lowest link in terms of the help that you can get from your close friends or families. Since we hit the highest level, the National Assembly passed a suicide prevention law, and since then, we have introduced various policies. And since then, Korea Suicide Prevention Center was formed. And also what's good is that the Gormoxone, the very toxic herbicide, has been stopped in sales. And when we post reports about this new report or new policies, and some people negatively respond. However, majority of the Korean populations welcome the policies, and this kind of approach of prohibiting the sales of toxic pesticides has decreased suicide rate. And since we passed a law that we are seeing more legislations have been passed, including 12 of them. So the National Assembly is following up of implementing new laws, and that is accelerating changes. That has led to the creation of National Action Plan for Suicide Prevention in 2018. This is included in 100 major projects by the government. And one of them is the Finlandish example. In the Scandinavian countries, their population is not that big. There are about 5 million. However, it's quite impossible to conduct autopsy on more than 13,000 people. But the information we can access is National Police Officer information. So we conducted pilot project, and we found out that about 50% in the southern part of Seoul occurred in one family household. So before suicide, there were crisis signs. For example, the person got hurt or person lost the jobs. And we realized that the government has to focus on the one person household. And some of the areas were notorious for elderly suicide. And among the elderly suicides, we realized that the 70% of them were living alone. Then it means we have to put 70% of our resources into living alone elderlies. Some of the areas are putting 80% to prevent elderlies. However, in some areas, rather than elderlies, suicides occurred among the labor workers. So we realized that we have to target our resources wisely into the needed areas. So we have conducted this research, and we have delivered this information to relevant agencies. And starting from this year, that we are using Statistics Korea. Last year's confirmed cases are published in September this year. That it means there is time lapse. In terms of traffic accidents, these reports are shown on the board almost real time. However, it takes a long time, almost a year, for statistics to send death report statistics to the Ministry of Welfare and Health. In the past, this kind of information was not accessible, but now you can check this information on the website of Statistics Korea. And in the past, there were divided tasks, but the things are integrated now. Also, we have started gatekeeper creation. and gatekeeper nurturing project has been included in the new legislation. And until last year, more than 1.3 million people have completed the training. But due to the COVID-19, we are conducting online training this year. And I'd like to emphasize the media's role. In 2017, very well-known celebrity was conducted suicide. However, there was less information about the suicide. In the past, in Korea, we used to reveal almost all information about suicide. However, we referred cases from the world, which shows not indicating the details of the method of suicide, but giving the information about the center information, like suicide prevention center information. Also, that we have created pan-government structure led by the Prime Minister. So every quarter, the Minister is presiding a meeting. The leaders of the world, president and prime ministers are taking care of this issue. Then things are getting better much quickly. Starting from February, March, every day, 8 o'clock, President and Prime Ministers are gathered to brief the leader, and even on Sunday, and also that they take care of psychological response. So we are witnessing that this COVID-19 issues are being treated very quickly, but we have to focus more on the psychological issues. These are quite similar to the statistics released by the UK. As we mentioned earlier, that also we heard from the US case. But here the cutoff value is more than, the risk group is more than 10, so it's too high. It's a different scenario whether it's going to be connected to the real suicide. However, there are people who have worn off, who have been struggling due to the COVID-19.
But it is not necessarily like that. Even if there is a disaster, suicide will go up. It's not like that, because the relationship between disaster and suicide will be different depending on the characteristics of the disaster and how we coped with that. So according to police agency of South Korea, there are multiple reasons for the increasing number of suicide cases in South Korea. But what is fortunate is that in Korea, like in Japan, the suicide rate, even though it is a potential figure, did not go up. It went down actually. This was thanks to probably any honeymoon period effects or a result of a social confidence that we achieved, and or thanks to support from communities as well. So the suicide cases went down in August this year, but we are still concerned about the possibility of that figure going up again. So what we should do, we have worked so hard on the mental prevention or mental quarantine. So we received calls for consultation for people, and we also provided services for mental health conditions, and we also collaborated with the public sector as well. So we made a coordinated effort to provide emergency treatment to people because depression or some agony that people are suffering from, it's not unusual case during this pandemic era. So in some cases, people say that that kind of symptoms are something necessary for people because because of that symptoms, we will be able to understand and identify some potential risks. So we are calling it education. So psychological first aid education. So it includes social services that is being given to people who are feeling depressed and discouraged. So for those people, we will provide this mental or psychiatric education. And this is a UN policy brief, and it also emphasized the importance of outreaching to people who are at risk. So it makes sense that we have to go to those people who are in need of help. But that kind of system has been being established from 1980s and 1990s as well, because the type of families is going through a dramatic change as time goes by, and now we are just beginning to provide customized services to those in need. But while we are trying out that system, and while we are at an earlier stage, the COVID-19 pandemic have occurred. So it requires a coordinated effort from the academia, from the public and private sector altogether. So to conclude, during this time of pandemic, phone calls or social media could be good methods to provide consultation for people. So we have to increase that kind of services even further. And I think all countries will agree with that. And if you call to a hotline system, within 72 hours, the doctors who are responsible for that disease will respond to that calls, and they could even go to a place where those people are staying. So this means that the municipalities also have some roles to play to reduce the suicide rate in Korea as well. But in South Korea, we are making a huge sacrifice and huge effort to prevent further expansion of COVID-19 virus. But if we could make the same kind of effort to prevent suicide in Korea, I am confident that we will be able to be very efficient and very successful in preventing suicide as well. So it was my great pleasure to be with you today to discuss such an important topic. Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Professor Paik. Once again, please give him another big round of applause.